The morning Sarah-chan discovered she could hear the voice of the last dragon. Earth had been under alien occupation for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Not that anyone was counting anymore. Most humans had given up hope of ever seeing their blue sky without the massive shadow ships of the Veilthrak Empire blocking out the sun. Sarah pressed her face against the grimy window of the underground shelter, watching the patrol drones sweep across the ruins of what used to be downtown Chicago. At 17, she barely remembered time before the invasion. Her memories of childhood were fragments: ice cream trucks, birthday parties, her mother's laugh. Now those seemed like dreams from another person's life. "Sarah, get away from there," whispered Marcus, her younger brother. At 14, he'd grown up faster than any kid should have to. "You know what happens if they spot movement." She pulled back from the window, but her eyes remained fixed on the sky. Something felt different today. There was an electricity in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The other 43 people in their shelter seemed to feel it too. Children huddled closer to their parents. Adults checked their makeshift weapons for the 100th time. The Veilthrak had conquered Earth with ruthless efficiency. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Plasma weapons that could melt through tank armor. Shields that deflected nuclear missiles. Worse yet, they'd brought creatures from other worlds to help maintain control. Savage beasts that hunted humans for sport. And, worst of all, the mind slaves. Humans who'd been captured and had their free will stripped away, turned into perfect soldiers for the occupation force. But Sarah had heard whispers in the past few months. Rumors of something the aliens feared. Something they were searching for with increasing desperation. The resistance fighters who occasionally visited their shelter spoke in hushed tones about ancient stories, legends that might be more than just fantasy. Dragons, old Tom had said just last week, his weathered face serious in the candlelight. Not the fairy tale kind. Something else. Something that was here long before humans walked this planet. The other adults had dismissed him as losing his mind from too many years underground. But Sarah had felt something stir inside her chest when he spoke those words, like an echo of something vast and powerful that she couldn't quite understand. Now, as she watched the alien patrols, that feeling was stronger than ever. It pulled at her, urging her toward the surface despite every survival instinct screaming at her to stay hidden. "I need to go up there," she whispered. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Are you crazy? They'll kill you on sight." "No." Sarah shook her head, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "Something's calling me. I have to go." Before anyone could stop her, she was moving toward the hidden exit. The shelter erupted in frantic whispers, but Sarah barely heard them. The pulling sensation was overwhelming now, like a rope tied around her soul, dragging her towards something she couldn't name. She emerged into the devastated street through a cleverly concealed manhole cover. The air above ground was thick with ash and the acrid smell of burned buildings. Overhead, the massive Veilthrak mothership blotted out most of the sky, its hull stretching for miles in every direction. Sarah moved carefully through the rubble, following alleyways and staying in the shadows. She'd done this before, scavenging runs to find food or supplies. But this felt different. She wasn't hunting for resources. She was being hunted by something, drawn forward by an invisible force. The pull led her toward the lake, to what had once been Grant Park. Now it was a wasteland of twisted metal and broken concrete. At its center stood something that made her stop and stare. A crater, massive and perfectly circular, as if something had punched straight down through the earth. The aliens had cordoned it off with energy barriers and posted guards around the perimeter. But even from a distance, Sarah could feel heat radiating from the depths. More importantly, she could hear something, a voice, ancient and vast, speaking words that bypassed her ears and went straight to her mind. Child of fire and earth. Child of the between times. You'll come at last. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart hammering. Who's there? What do you want? I am the last, the final keeper of the old covenant. And you, Sarah-chan, are the bridge between what was and what must be. That's impossible. I am nobody. I'm just a girl hiding in a hole in the ground. Laughter filled her mind, warm and amused despite the desperate circumstances. Every hero believes they are nobody, child. It is what makes them heroes. The voice was coming from the crater. Sarah found herself moving toward it, even as Veilthrak patrol ships swept overhead. The energy barriers meant nothing to her. She walked through them as if they were made of mist. The alien guards looked right at her, but somehow failed to see her passing. At the edge of the crater, she looked down and gasped. Far below, coiled in the depths of what looked like a natural cavern, lay a dragon. Not the medieval fantasy kind from old books and movies, but something far more magnificent and terrible. Its scales shifted between colors that had no names, reflecting light that seemed to come from within. It was easily the size of a city block, but despite its immense bulk, it appeared to be badly wounded. Great gouges marred its hide, and one wing hung at an awkward angle. The Veilthrak found me 3 days ago, the voice explained as Sarah stared in awe. They have been trying to break into my refuge, but the old protections still hold. Barely. You're really a dragon, Sarah whispered. Dragons are real. We were the first children of this world. Long before your species arose, we guided the growth of life on Earth. We were its guardians, its caretakers. But time made us complacent. When the first threats came from the stars, we were unprepared. Sarah began climbing down into the crater, her hands finding holes in the stone as if they'd been carved specifically for her use. The first threats? You mean there were others before the Veilthrak? Many others. Wave after wave of conquerors, each believing they could claim this world as their own. We drove them back, but at great cost. One by one, my kind fell until only I remained. As she descended, the air grew warmer and filled with a strange, electric energy that made her skin tingle. The dragon's massive eye opened as she approached, larger than her entire body and filled with intelligence that was clearly far older than human civilization. I am Pyraxis, last of the Earthkeepers, and I've been waiting for you for a very long time. Waiting for me specifically? But how could you know I would come? Because you carry the spark, child. The same fire that burns in the heart of every world guardian. It has been passed down through your bloodline for thousands of years, waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. Sarah reached the bottom of the crater and approached the dragon slowly. This close, she could see that his wounds were worse than they'd appeared from above. Dark energy crackled around the edges of the cuts, preventing them from healing. You're dying, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Yes, the Veilthrak weapons carry a poison that prevents regeneration. I have perhaps hours left before my strength fails completely. The dragon's mental voice carried no self-pity, only weary acceptance. But before I fall, I can give you the tools to save your world. I don't understand. I'm just one person. The Veilthrak have millions of soldiers, weapons that can destroy cities, ships that can crack planets in half. What could I possibly do against all that? You can become what I am, child. The bond between dragon and guardian is not merely ceremonial. We can share our strength, our knowledge, our very essence. But the process is dangerous. Many who attempt it do not survive. Sarah looked up at the crater rim, where she could see Veilthrak soldiers beginning to gather. They'd noticed that their barrier was breached, and it wouldn't be long before they found a way down. What happens if I say yes? You become the first human dragon bonded in over 3,000 years. You gain access to powers your species has forgotten it ever possessed. But more than that, you become responsible for the protection of this world and every life upon it. It is not a burden to accept lightly. The sound of plasma cutters echoed from above as the aliens began carving a path down to the cavern. Sarah looked into the dragon's ancient eye and saw reflected there not just intelligence, but compassion. Despite his pain, despite facing his own death, Pyraxis was offering her a choice rather than forcing her hand. If I don't do this, what happens to everyone? My brother, the other people in the shelters, all the humans still fighting? The Veilthrak will continue their conquest. Your species will be enslaved, eventually bred into compliance. Earth will become another tributary world in their empire, stripped of resources and life until nothing remains but dust. Above them, the plasma cutters were getting closer. Sarah could hear alien voices shouting commands in their harsh, clicking language. And if I do this, if I bond with you, then you become something new. Not quite human anymore, but not dragon either. Something the universe has never seen before. You gain the power to fight back, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. But the cost? Pyraxis paused. The cost may be everything you are. Sarah thought of Marcus, still waiting in the shelter below. She thought of old Tom with his stories of dragons. She thought of all the children who'd never seen a world without alien ships in the sky. Will I still be me? The core of who you are will remain. But everything else, your perspective, your capabilities, your understanding of what is possible, all of that will change. You will see the world as I see it, feel the connections between all living things. You will carry within you the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years. Some find such awareness overwhelming. The plasma cutters broke through. Veilthrak's soldiers began rappelling down into the cavern, their weapon systems charging with deadly light. Sarah stepped forward and placed her hand on Pyraxis's massive snout. The moment her skin made contact with his scales, electricity shot through her entire body. Not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. I accept the bond, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the cavern despite the approaching enemies. Then, let's begin, Pyraxis replied, and may the universe forgive us both for what we are about to unleash. The dragon's eyes flared with inner fire, and suddenly, Sarah was no longer standing in a cavern beneath Chicago. She was floating in a space between spaces, surrounded by swirling galaxies and burning stars. Pyraxis was there with her, but not as a physical being, as pure consciousness, ancient and vast. This is the place where minds touch, he explained. Here, we can share everything we are without the limitations of flesh and bone. Knowledge flooded into Sarah's consciousness like a tsunami. The history of Earth stretching back millions of years. The rise and fall of civilizations her species had never imagined. The secret networks of power that connected every living thing on the planet. Technologies that made the Veilthrak weapons look like crude clubs. But with the knowledge came something else. A burning sense of responsibility that threatened to crush her beneath its weight. She could feel every human life on Earth, sense their fear and pain and desperate hope. She could feel the planet itself, wounded by the alien occupation, but still clinging to life. It is too much, she gasped, her sense of self beginning to dissolve in the flood of information. Hold on to who you are, Pyraxis urged. You are Sarachun. You love your brother. You dream of a free sky. You choose to fight rather than surrender. Let that be your anchor. Gradually, the flood of knowledge organized itself in her mind. She was still herself, but now she understood so much more. The dragon's memories became her memories. His understanding of the fundamental forces that governed reality became hers. Good, Pyraxis said, his mental voice growing weaker. The bond is taking hold, but we must return quickly. The Veilthrak have found us. They snapped back to physical reality just as the first alien soldiers reached the cavern floor. Sarah opened her eyes and immediately knew that everything had changed. The world looked different now. She could see energy patterns flowing through the air, could sense the life force of every creature in the area, could feel the pulse of the planet's core far beneath her feet. The Veilthrak raised their weapons, but Sarah moved before conscious thought could intervene. Power flowed through her body, power that felt as natural as breathing. She gestured, and a wall of force slammed into the aliens, sending them flying back against the cavern walls. Good, Pyraxis said weakly. But this is only the beginning. The real fight starts now. Sarah turned to look at the dragon, and saw that his form was beginning to fade, becoming translucent. What's happening to you? The bond is complete. I am becoming part of you now, as you are becoming part of me. My physical form is no longer needed. But you're dying. Yes, but also being reborn. We are both being reborn. His massive head lowered until he could look directly into her eyes. Remember, Sarah-chun, you're not alone. Every dragon who came before me is now part of you. Every guardian who gave their life to protect this world lives on in your heart. Draw on their strength when yours fails. The dragon's form dissolved into motes of light that swirled around Sarah before sinking into her skin. The sensation was indescribable, like being struck by lightning while simultaneously being embraced by everyone she'd ever loved. When it was over, she stood alone in the cavern. But she wasn't truly alone. She could feel Pyraxis's presence in her mind, along with dozens of others, ancient voices that welcomed her into their ranks. Above, more Veilthrax soldiers were descending. But Sarah no longer felt afraid. She looked up at them with eyes that now held the wisdom of ages. "You want to fight?" she called out, her voice echoing with harmonic overtones that made the cavern walls vibrate. "Then, let's see how your empire handles the return of Earth's guardians." She raised her hand, and fire bloomed between her fingers. Not ordinary flame, but dragon fire that could burn through the hull of a starship. The Veilthrax soldiers stopped their descent, suddenly, uncertain. Sarah smiled, feeling power course through her veins. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since the invasion started, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The dragon fire that erupted from Sarah's hands wasn't just flame. It was pure creative force given violent expression. The cavern filled with light so intense that the Veilthrax soldiers' advanced visors couldn't compensate. Their screams echoed off the stone walls as their energy weapons simply melted in their grasp. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in their destruction. Through her bond with Pyraxis, she experienced the vast network of life that connected every creature on Earth, and even the death of these invaders sent ripples of pain through that network. The dragons had never been destroyers by nature. They were gardeners, nurturing life wherever they found it. Such is the burden of guardianship, Pyraxis's voice whispered in her mind. To protect, we must sometimes harm. To preserve the many, we must sacrifice the few. Sarah climbed swiftly up the crater walls, her enhanced strength making the ascent effortless. The knowledge flowing through her mind included martial arts from a dozen dead civilizations, military strategies that had toppled galactic empires, and, most importantly, detailed intelligence about the Veilthrax occupation force. She emerged from the crater to find herself surrounded by nearly 100 alien soldiers. Their insectoid faces were hidden behind combat helmets, but she could sense their confusion through the bioelectrical fields all living creatures produced. They'd never encountered anything like what she'd become. The lead commander, distinguished by the crimson markings on his armor, raised his weapon and spoke in the harsh, clicking language of his people. Sarah understood every word, the dragon's ancient knowledge, including the linguistic patterns of hundreds of species. Surrender yourself, aberration. You will be studied, then terminated. Sarah responded in perfect Veilthrax, her pronunciation causing several soldiers to step backward in surprise. I am Sarah-chun, first of the new guardians. I offer you one chance to leave this world in peace. The commander's mandibles clicked in what she recognized as laughter. One human child against the might of the Seventh Fleet? Even with whatever mutation you've undergone, you are nothing compared to our power. Sarah felt dragon fire building her chest, but she held it back. The true strength of the Guardians had never been raw destruction. It had been understanding. She reached out with her enhanced senses, feeling the electromagnetic signatures of every alien device within miles. The Veilthrax depended entirely on technology for their dominance. Their weapons, their armor, their communication systems, all of it relied on energy patterns that followed predictable laws. And Sarah now understood those laws better than their own engineers. She raised her hands and spoke a word in the ancient dragon tongue. Instantly, every alien weapon in the area simply stopped working. Energy cells drained. Targeting systems failed. Even their armor's life support began to shut down. The commander looked at his dead weapon in disbelief, then back at Sarah with what she could only describe as fear. Impossible. Our technology is shielded against all known forms of electromagnetic interference. Your shields protect against the crude manipulations of younger species, Sarah replied, walking calmly toward the circle of soldiers. But the dragons learned to shape energy itself before your people even left their homeworld. We built the first principles that govern how power flows through the universe. As she approached, the aliens instinctively backed away. Without their weapons and armor, they were far more fragile than humans, evolved on a world with lighter gravity and thinner atmosphere. But Sarah wasn't interested in slaughtering them. That wasn't what Guardians did. Instead, she reached out with her mind, touching the consciousness of each soldier. Not to control them. That was the way of tyrants and conquerors. Simply to show them the truth of what they were doing to this world. Through her enhanced perception, she shared with them the sight of Earth as the dragons saw it. A living entity, brilliant with interconnected streams of life. She showed them the beauty of diversity, the intricate web of relationships that connected every creature from the smallest bacteria to the largest whale. Then, she showed them what the Veilfrak occupation was doing to that web. The species driven to extinction by habitat destruction. The children dying in bombed-out shelters. The slow, methodical murder of a world's biosphere for the sake of extracting mineral resources. One by one, the aliens dropped to their knees. Several removed their helmets with shaking hands, revealing faces twisted with what Sarah recognized as grief. They'd never seen the consequences of their actions before. The Veilfrak military machine was designed to prevent exactly this kind of empathy. Well done. Pyraxis's voice murmured approvingly in her mind. Sometimes the greatest weapon is simply showing an enemy the truth. But their communion was interrupted by a new sound, the deep thrumming of heavy assault ships approaching from the south. The main Veilfrak fleet had noticed the disruption and was sending reinforcements. Sarah looked up to see 3 massive warships descending through the clouds, their hulls bristling with weapons that could glass an entire city block. These weren't the light patrol craft she'd just disabled. These were capital ships designed to break entire armies. Now we face a real test, Pyraxis warned. Those vessels carry enough firepower to crack continents, and their AI systems will not be as susceptible to empathy as organic minds. Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. The knowledge flowing through her mind included detailed specifications of Veilfrak military technology, and she knew exactly how dangerous those ships were. They bombarded a dozen worlds into submission. Their plasma cannons could melt through mountains. But then she remembered something else, a technique the ancient dragons had used during the first invasion attempts thousands of years ago. It was dangerous, requiring precise control of forces that could easily tear her apart if she made even a small mistake. But it was also their most powerful defensive strategy. She closed her eyes and reached deep into the planet's energy matrix. Every world that supported life had one, a network of power that connected the magnetic field, the tectonic system, the biosphere, and the fundamental forces that held matter together. The dragons had learned to tap into this matrix, drawing on the power of an entire planet when necessary. The Veilfrak soldiers around her scattered as the ground began to vibrate with harmonic frequencies that bypassed the ear and went straight to the bone. Sarah rose into the air, lifted by forces that made gravity seem like a gentle suggestion. Energy crackled around her in patterns that painted the sky with impossible colors. The lead warship opened fire, sending a stream of plasma hot enough to vaporize steel straight toward her. Sarah didn't dodge. Instead, she reached out and caught the energy beam in her bare hands, feeling it flow through her body like water through a riverbed. The dragon knowledge showed her how to redirect the force, how to twist it back on itself, and amplify it through the planet's own power. She gestured, and The warship's own plasma blast reflected back at it with 10 times its original intensity. The ship's shields held for perhaps half a second before they overloaded catastrophically. The vessel broke apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the sky like a second sun. The other two warships immediately changed tactics, spreading out and launching swarms of guided missiles. Sarah felt each projectile as it approached, their guidance systems singing with electronic intelligence. But guidance systems could be persuaded to find new targets. She spoke another word in the dragon tongue, and every missile in the sky suddenly turned on its neighbors. The air filled with explosions as the weapons destroyed each other in a chaotic light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so deadly. "Impressive," Pyraxis commented, "but you're drawing too much power too quickly. The human body wasn't designed to channel planetary forces. You need to pace yourself." Sarah could feel what he meant. Her skin was beginning to glow with residual energy, and her heartbeat was approaching dangerous levels. But the remaining warships were coordinating their attack now, using pattern bombing to carpet the entire area with destruction. She needed to end this quickly. Sarah reached deeper into the planetary matrix than any dragon had attempted in recorded history. She felt the molten core spinning far beneath her feet, since the magnetic field lines that protected Earth from solar radiation touched the quantum foam that existed at the boundary between matter and energy. And she spoke a word that no living creature had spoken for 10,000 years. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every artificial construct within 100 miles simply stopped functioning. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply returned to the component elements from which they'd been built. The Veilthrak warships fell from the sky as their hull materials reverted to raw metal and ceramic dust. But the technique took everything she had. Sarah collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion. Through her enhanced senses, she could feel more ships approaching from orbit, dozens of them, including the massive command vessel that coordinated the entire occupation force. "Rest," Pyraxis urged. "You've done well, but this is only the beginning. The Veilthrak will not underestimate you again." Sarah struggled to her feet, looking around at the devastation she'd caused. The surviving alien soldiers were fleeing toward the city, their weapons and equipment useless. But she took no pride in the victory. Each death, even that of an invader, was a loss that diminished the web of life she was sworn to protect. "How do I stop them without becoming a destroyer myself?" she asked aloud. "That is the eternal challenge of guardianship," Pyraxis replied. "Sometimes there is no clean solution. Sometimes we must choose between protecting the innocent and preserving our own moral purity. The dragons faced this choice many times throughout history. And what did they choose? They chose to protect life, whatever the cost to themselves. Is why I am a last. My predecessors gave everything they had to keep this world safe from those who would corrupt or consume it." Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. She'd thought bonding with a dragon would make her powerful enough to drive off the invaders easily. Instead, it had shown her just how complex the real battle was. A new sound reached her ears, helicopters approaching from the north. But these weren't alien craft. They were human-built machines, battered and jury-rigged, but still flying. The resistance had heard the explosions and come to investigate. The lead helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and debris. The pilot who emerged was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and scars that spoke of many battles. Sarah recognized her immediately. Commander Elena Vasquez, one of the leaders of the global resistance movement. "Who the hell are you?" Vasquez demanded, her weapon trained on Sarah despite the obvious futility of the gesture. "And what did you just do to those Veilthrak ships?" Sarah considered how to answer that question. How do you explain to someone that dragons are real? That an ordinary teenage girl had just become something unprecedented in human history? "My name is Sarah Chun," she said finally, "and I think I might be able to help you win this war." Vasquez lowered her weapon slowly, her eyes taking in the scattered debris that had once been 3 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. "Kid, if you can do this." She gestured at the destruction around them. "Then, maybe we actually have a chance." Behind Vasquez, more resistance fighters were emerging from their aircraft. Sarah could see the hope beginning to kindle in their eyes as they realized what she'd accomplished. For the first time in years, humanity had struck a real blow against their oppressors. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The Veilfrak Empire controlled thousands of worlds, commanded fleets that could destroy entire star systems. And now that she'd revealed herself, they would bring everything they had to bear against Earth. "Let them come," Pyraxis's voice whispered with ancient confidence. "We have something they do not understand, the power of a world fighting for its own survival. And now we have something else as well." "What's that?" Sarah asked silently. "A guardian who remembers what it means to be human. That may be the key to victory in ways we cannot yet imagine." Sarah looked up at the sky where alien ships were gathering like storm clouds, and she felt that strange mixture of hope and determination that had driven humanity through every crisis in its history. The real war was about to begin. The Resistance base, hidden beneath the ruins of Denver, was a masterpiece of human ingenuity and desperation. Carved out of natural cave systems and reinforced with salvage materials, it housed nearly 3,000 fighters from across North America. Sarah had been there for 2 weeks, and she still marveled at what people could accomplish when their backs were against the wall. Commander Vasquez led her through the main operations center, where dozens of technicians monitored alien communications and tracked fleet movements across the solar system. The screens showed a sobering picture. The Veilfrak were massing for a coordinated assault unlike anything they'd attempted before. 15 Dreadnought-class battleships have jumped in from the Outer Rim, reported Lieutenant Morrison, a young man whose left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic. They're taking position in high orbit along with the existing occupation fleet. Intel estimates they could crack the planet's crust if they wanted to. Sarah studied the tactical display, her dragon-enhanced senses picking up details that would have been invisible to normal human perception. The alien formations weren't random. They were arranged according to principles of force distribution that the dragons had encountered before. "They're not planning to destroy the planet," she said quietly. "They want to capture me alive." Vasquez looked at her sharply. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen this pattern in Pyraxis's memories. It's a containment formation designed to prevent a single powerful entity from escaping while minimizing collateral damage to valuable resources. The Veilfrak have encountered dragon-bonded individuals before, Pyraxis confirmed in her mind, on 3 separate worlds during their expansion across this galaxy. They learned that brute force alone cannot defeat a guardian. You must be captured and studied to understand the source of your power. "So what do we do?" asked Morrison. "Even with the new weapons you've helped us develop, we can't take on 15 dreadnoughts." Over the past 2 weeks, Sarah had been working with the Resistance's engineers to create technology that could level the playing field. By showing them how to tap into the same energy matrices that powered her abilities, they'd built weapons that could penetrate Veilfrak shields and armor that could deflect their plasma weapons. But equipping a few thousand fighters with dragon tech wasn't going to be enough against a fleet that could burn continents. "We need to change the nature of the battle," Sarah said. "Instead of meeting them in space where they have every advantage, we need to force them to come to us." "They won't land troops," Vasquez pointed out. "Not after what you did to their last ground force. They will if we give them something they want more than anything else." Sarah turned to face the assembled resistance leaders. "They want me, so I'm going to give them the chance to take me." The room erupted in protests, but Sarah held up her hand for silence. "Not surrender. Bait. We'll let them think they found a way to capture me, then spring a trap they'll never see coming." She moved to the central display and began highlighting points on the global map. There are 7 major ley line intersections around the planet, places where the Earth's energy matrix is most accessible. If I can reach these points and activate them simultaneously, I can turn the entire planet into a weapon. That is ambitious, Pyraxis said carefully. The ancient dragons attempted something similar during the first Great Invasion. It did not end well. What happened? Sarah asked silently. They succeeded in destroying the invader fleet. They also destabilized the entire continental shelf and triggered a mass extinction event that took millions of years to recover from. Sarah felt a chill run through her, but she pushed the fear aside. This time will be different. I have something the ancient dragons didn't. What's that? Vasquez asked, having caught only half the conversation. Human ingenuity, Sarah replied, and the ability to think small-scale instead of in geological time frames. She began outlining her plan. Instead of trying to channel the full power of the planetary matrix through her body, which would indeed risk catastrophic consequences, she would use the Resistance's new Dragon Tech devices as focus points. Each ley line intersection would be equipped with a resonance amplifier that could channel and direct the Earth's energy without requiring her to be physically present. It's like a distributed nervous system, she explained. I'll still be the central coordinator, but the actual power will flow through the network instead of through me. Dr. Rebecca Santos, the Resistance's chief scientist, studied the schematics with growing excitement. This could actually work. We need to modify our existing amplifiers, but the basic principles are sound. There's one problem, Morrison pointed out. Half of these ley line intersections are in areas under heavy Veilthrak control. We'll never be able to get teams in position without being detected. Sarah smiled grimly. That's where the bait part comes in. I'm going to walk right up to their main command ship and demand to speak with whoever's in charge. The argument that followed lasted 3 hours. Every person in the room had objections, alternatives, or dire warnings about the risks involved. But in the end, they all came to the same conclusion. It was their only real chance. 2 days later, Sarah stood in the center of what had once been Times Square, looking up at the massive Veilthrak command vessel hovering 500 feet above Manhattan. Her dragon-enhanced senses could feel the weight of its attention focused on her like a searchlight. She made no attempt to hide her approach. In fact, she deliberately made as much noise as possible, broadcasting on every frequency the aliens monitored and leaving a trail of disabled patrol drones in her wake. Are you certain about this? Pyraxis asked for the dozenth time. No, Sarah admitted. But being certain is a luxury we can't afford anymore. The command ship's primary transport beam locked onto her, and she felt herself being lifted into the air by forces that bypassed her enhanced defenses entirely. The Veilthrak had clearly learned from their previous encounters. The teleportation process was disorienting but brief. One moment she was standing on broken asphalt under a gray sky. The next she was in a sterile metal chamber surrounded by some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. The Veilthrak High Commander was larger than his subordinates, with additional limbs that marked him as a member of the warrior caste. His carapace bore scars from a dozen campaigns, and his multifaceted eyes held an intelligence that had conquered entire star systems. Sarah Chun, he said in accented English, you have caused considerable disruption to our operations. That was the idea, Sarah replied, noting the energy-dampening fields built into the walls. They were powerful, but not designed to handle the specific frequencies that Dragonfire operated on. Your species shows admirable tenacity, the High Commander continued, beginning to circle her like a predator. But tenacity without wisdom is merely postponed extinction. You cannot defeat the Veilthrak Empire with parlor tricks and stolen technology. Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But I wasn't planning to defeat the entire empire. Just a fleet you've got here. The aliens' mandibles clicked in amusement. 15 Dreadnought-class vessels and a command ship represent enough firepower to sterilize this world completely. What could one half-trained Guardian possibly do against such force? Sarah felt the resistance teams moving into position around the globe. Through her connection to the planetary matrix, she could sense their Dragon Tech amplifiers being activated at each ley line intersection. The network was almost ready. You know what your problem is? she asked the High Commander. You think like conquerors. You see a problem and try to solve it with bigger weapons and more force. And you think like prey, he replied dismissively. Clever prey, perhaps, but prey nonetheless. Actually, I think like a gardener. Sarah reached out with her enhanced senses, feeling for the weak points in the ship's power grid. And right now, you're a weed that needs to be removed. The attack, when it came, was nothing like what the Veilthrak expected. Instead of dragon fire or energy manipulation, Sarah simply spoke a word in the ancient tongue that made every artificial intelligence system on the ship suddenly become self-aware. The result was immediate chaos. Automated defense systems turned on their operators. Navigation computers began plotting courses to destinations their programming forbade. Environmental controls started recycling atmosphere in patterns that would slowly suffocate the crew. But that was just the opening move. As the ship's crew struggled to regain control of their own vessel, Sarah activated the global network. 7 amplifiers on 7 continents began drawing power from the Earth's magnetic field, its tectonic system, its biosphere itself. But instead of channeling that power destructively, they wove it into patterns of creation and protection. Every human on the planet suddenly felt it, a warmth spreading through their bodies, healing old wounds and strengthening immune systems. The planet's biosphere began repairing damage that had accumulated over decades of industrial pollution and 3 years of alien occupation. And in space, the Veilthrak fleet found themselves facing something unprecedented in their military experience. The planet was fighting back, not with weapons or technology, but with life itself. Streams of pure creative force reached out from Earth's surface, touching each alien vessel and beginning to transform it. Whole metal sprouted crystalline growths that interfered with weapon systems. Organic computers began spontaneously generating code that promoted cooperation over conquest. Beautiful, Pyraxis whispered in wonder. I never imagined the network could be used in this way. The High Commander stared in disbelief at his command displays as ship after ship reported the same impossible readings. What are you doing to my fleet? I'm showing them what Earth is really about, Sarah replied. Not conquest or destruction, but growth and cooperation and the potential for something better. She could feel the consciousness of every Veilthrak crew member as the planet's influence reached them. Unlike her earlier empathy projection, this wasn't forced revelation. It was an offering. The choice to accept a different way of seeing the universe, or to reject it and remain unchanged. Most chose to accept. Within an hour, the entire invasion fleet had effectively ceased to exist as a military force. Some ships had been transformed into living vessels that could repair themselves and grow stronger over time. Others had been converted into mobile research stations dedicated to studying and preserving life rather than conquering it. And the crews themselves were changing, their aggressive conditioning being replaced by curiosity and wonder at the diversity of life in the universe. This is impossible, the High Commander said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. The Veilthrak Empire has conquered 1,000 worlds. We are the apex predators of a galaxy. You were, Sarah corrected gently. But predator-prey relationships are just one way of organizing an ecosystem. There are others that work better in the long run. She could feel the transformation reaching him as well, offering him the same choice she'd given his crews. The choice to grow beyond what he'd always been. For a moment, she thought he might accept. She could see the struggle in his compound eyes, the war between everything he'd been taught and the new possibilities opening before him. But then his warrior conditioning reasserted itself. No, he snarled, raising a weapon that had been hidden in his carapace. I will not be corrupted by your world's influence. The weapon fired, sending a beam of concentrated antimatter straight towards Sarah's heart. It was the kind of energy that could unmake matter at the quantum level. Nothing living could survive contact with it. Sarah didn't try to dodge or deflect the beam. Instead, she did something the High Commander couldn't have anticipated. She absorbed it. The antimatter flowed into her body like water into a sponge, adding its destructive potential to the creative forces already cycling through her enhanced physiology. The combination was unstable, dangerous, and exactly what she needed for her final gambit. "Thank you," she said to the shocked alien commander. "I needed that extra energy for what comes next." Sarah reached out through the global network one last time, but instead of drawing power from the planet, she gave back everything she'd absorbed. The antimatter's destructive potential, transformed by dragon fire into pure creative force, flowed into every ley line on Earth. The result was unprecedented in the planet's history. Deserts bloomed with life overnight. Polluted rivers ran clean. Extinct species began spontaneously reappearing as the planet's genetic memory reasserted itself. And, somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah heard the voices of the ancient dragons singing in harmony for the first time in 10,000 years. "It is done," Pyraxis said with deep satisfaction. "Earth is truly protected now, not just from this invasion, but from any that might follow. The planet itself has become conscious, aware of its own potential." Sarah felt her enhanced senses expanding beyond anything she'd experienced before. She could perceive not just Earth, but the solar system beyond, Mars beginning to stir with new life, the moons of Jupiter developing their own unique biospheres. Humanity was about to inherit a universe far stranger and more wonderful than they'd ever imagined. And she would be there to help guide them through the transition. 6 months after the transformation of the Veilthrak fleet, Sarah stood on the observation deck of what had once been the alien command ship and was now something entirely unprecedented in galactic history. The vessel had grown, reshaping itself according to principles of organic architecture that combined the best of dragon engineering with Veilthrak technology. Through the living crystal windows, she could see Earth turning slowly below. No longer the wounded world she'd known, but something vibrant and alive beyond anything in recorded history. The planet's new consciousness had manifested in ways that still amazed her. Cities that cleaned themselves and grew food in vertical gardens. Oceans that actively filtered pollutants while nurturing new forms of life. Skies where dragonfire aurora danced alongside phenomena that had no names yet. "The Council is ready for you," said Commander Vasquez, approaching from behind. The Resistance leader had adapted to the new world better than most, her military background translating well to the complex logistics of rebuilding human civilization. Sarah turned from the window, noting how much Vasquez had changed. The stress lines around her eyes had faded, and her gray hair was showing streaks of its original brown color. The planet's healing influence affected everyone, reversing years of damage from radiation exposure and poor nutrition. "How are the negotiations going with the Centauri delegation?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the main conference chamber. "Better than expected. Apparently, word of what happened here has spread through half the galaxy. 3 more species have requested permission to send representatives." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at that news. The transformation of Earth had indeed sent shockwaves throughout known space. For the first time in galactic history, a species had defeated the Veilthrak Empire not through superior firepower, but by offering them something better than conquest. The reaction had been swift and varied. Some civilizations were terrified, fearing that Earth represented a new threat to the established order. Others were curious, sending envoys to learn how such a transformation was possible. And a few, the ones that had suffered under Veilthrak rule, saw it as hope for their own liberation. The conference chamber had been grown rather than built, its walls formed from living coral that could adjust its acoustics and ambient lighting based on the emotions of those present. Around the circular table sat representatives of 7 different species, along with human leaders from every major population center on Earth. At the head of the table, High Commander Thanel waited patiently. The former Veilthrak leader bore little resemblance to the warrior who had tried to capture Sarah 6 months ago. The planet's influence had changed him profoundly, replacing his aggressive instincts with a deep curiosity about the universe and his place in it. Guardian Shun, he said formally, using the title that had emerged naturally over the past months. We have received another communication from the Veilthrak home fleet. Sarah took her seat, feeling the chair adjust itself to her body temperature and posture. What do they want this time? The same thing they have demanded for the past 4 months. They want their ships and crews returned immediately, and they want you delivered for study and termination. Captain Zarth, representing the transformed Veilthrak crews, clicked her mandibles in what Sarah had learned was the equivalent of bitter laughter. The Imperial Command Council refuses to accept what has happened here. They keep insisting that we have been infected with some kind of biological weapon. In a sense, they're right, said Dr. Santos, who had become Earth's unofficial xenobiologist. We have been infected with the idea that cooperation might be better than conquest. Sarah reached out with her enhanced senses, feeling the pulse of life flowing through the ship around them. Every transformed vessel had become a living ecosystem, its crew working in harmony with the ship's consciousness to explore new ways of existing in space. The question is, she said quietly, what do we do when they come to collect their property by force? That decision may not be yours to make, Pyraxis whispered in her mind. Feel what approaches. Sarah extended her awareness beyond the ship, beyond Earth's atmosphere, out into the deeper currents of space. And there at the edge of the solar system, she sensed something that made her heart race with excitement and terror in equal measure. They're here, she said aloud. The Veilthrak home fleet. The reaction around the table was immediate. Some representatives reached for weapons that weren't there. Others began activating communication devices to alert their own species. But Captain Zartich simply bowed her head. I've been dreading this moment, she admitted. The Imperial Command represents everything I used to be, everything I am grateful to no longer be. How many ships? Asked Vasquez, slipping back into her military persona. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the massive presences moving through space toward them. 200 capital ships, maybe 300 smaller vessels. They're not taking any chances this time. The scale was staggering. The Veilthrak home fleet represented the accumulated military might of an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. Each capital ship was the size of a small city, armed with weapons that could crack moons and shielded by energy fields that could deflect stellar radiation. Earth's defenses won't stop them, Morrison said, his prosthetic arm whirring as he accessed tactical displays. We got maybe 50 transformed ships and whatever new capabilities the planet itself has developed. That's not enough firepower to match an entire Imperial fleet. Firepower isn't the answer, Sarah said firmly. If we try to fight them with weapons, we become no better than they are. The Guardians faced this choice before, Pyraxis reminded her. When the great fleets came to claim our worlds, some dragons chose to fight with all their power. They won their battles and lost their souls. Then, what do we do? Asked Dr. Santos. Hope they'll be reasonable. The Imperial fleet isn't like the occupation force. These are the core military units, conditioned from birth to view any deviation from Imperial doctrine as disease to be purged. Sarah stood and walked to the chamber's central display, which showed the approaching fleet as points of hostile red light. But overlaid on that tactical view was something else, the vast web of life that connected every living thing on Earth and now extended far beyond the planet itself. We offer them the same choice we offered everyone else, she said. The chance to grow beyond what they've always been. You're talking about attempting to transform an entire Imperial fleet, Thanel said quietly. Guardian, even with all the power at your disposal, that may be beyond possibility. Sarah felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. In the 6 months since the first transformation, she'd learned to use her abilities with precision and restraint. But what she was contemplating now would require her to reach deeper into the planetary matrix than ever before. It will require all of us, Pyraxis said. every dragon consciousness that lives on in your mind, every guardian who came before. And it will require something else as well. What? It will require you to trust in humanity's ability to make the right choice, even when that choice is difficult. 3 days later, the Veilthrak home fleet took position around Earth in a formation designed for planetary siege. Their admiral, a member of the highest warrior caste, had made his intentions clear in a series of communications that could barely be called negotiations. Return our ships and crews. Surrender the aberrant human known as Guardian Shun. Submit to Imperial authority for processing and re-education. You have 24 hours to comply. Sarah stood in the transformed command ship's central chamber, surrounded by representatives from every human settlement and allied species. Through her connection to the planetary network, she could feel the fear radiating from billions of people below. But she could also feel something else, determination. Humanity had tasted freedom and the possibility of something better than mere survival. They weren't going to give that up without a fight. Open a channel to the entire fleet, she told Captain Zartich. Guardian, are you certain about this approach? No, Sarah admitted. But I've learned that certainty is overrated. The communications array activated, broadcasting on every frequency the Veilthrak used for ship-to-ship coordination. Sarah's voice would reach every crew member in the fleet simultaneously. I am Sarah Chun, Guardian of Earth and speaker for the transformed fleet, she began. 6 months ago, your people came to our world as conquerors. We offered them something different, the chance to become partners in something greater than empire. Through the quantum communication channels, she could feel the reaction aboard the fleet. Confusion, anger, and, underneath it all, the first stirrings of curiosity. I know you've been told that we've contaminated your crews with biological weapons or mind control technology. That isn't true. We've simply shown them what the universe looks like when you stop trying to conquer it and start trying to understand it. Admiral Kreshtal's response was immediate and furious. Silence your propaganda, human. You will return our ships immediately or face the consequences. But Sarah continued speaking, her words carrying harmonics that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the listener's deeper nature. It was a technique the dragons had perfected over millions of years. Not mind control, but an invitation to see beyond the limitations of conditioning. Look around you, she said to the fleet. How many worlds have you conquered? How many species have you subjugated? And what has it gained you? Your own homeworld is dying from environmental collapse. Your people are so conditioned for war that they can barely remember what peace feels like. Now, Pyraxis whispered. Sarah reached out through the planetary network, but instead of drawing power for an attack, she channeled the accumulated life force of Earth into a different kind of weapon. Hope. Every person on the planet contributed something to the projection. Parents shared memories of their children's laughter. Artists contributed visions of beauty they created from nothing. Scientists offered the joy of discovery, the moment when the universe revealed one of its secrets. Farmers shared the satisfaction of nurturing life from soil. Teachers contributed the pride of watching students surpass their instructors. Even the transformed Veilthrak crews added their own experiences. The wonder they felt when they first understood that conquest and cooperation weren't mutually exclusive. The wave of collective human experience washed over the Veilthrak fleet like a tsunami of possibility. For perhaps the first time in their species' history, warriors bred for aggression felt what it was like to create rather than destroy. The effect was immediate and profound. Ship after ship reported the same phenomenon. Crew members dropping their weapons and staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Warriors trained from birth to follow orders without question suddenly, asking their superiors why. Admiral Kreshtal fought the influence with everything he had, but even his conditioning couldn't completely block the revelation flooding through his consciousness. For just a moment, he saw the universe as Sarah saw it, an infinite web of possibilities where every choice led to growth rather than destruction. "What have you done to me?" he whispered over the communication channel. "I've shown you who you really are underneath all the conditioning," Sarah replied gently. "The choice of what to do with that knowledge is yours." For 3 hours, the fleet hung motionless in space as individual crew members grappled with experiences their minds had never been designed to process. Some rejected the revelation entirely, retreating into the familiar certainty of imperial doctrine. But most found themselves fundamentally changed. When Admiral Kreshtal finally responded, his voice carried a weariness that spoke of decades of suppressed doubt finally being acknowledged. "You have given us much to consider, Guardian Shan. But even if what you show us is real, we cannot simply abandon our duty to the Empire. Too many depend on our continued service." "Then, don't abandon them," Sarah said. "Transform the Empire the same way you're transforming yourselves. Imagine what the Veilthrak could accomplish if they used their organizational skills and technological prowess for creation instead of conquest." Over the next week, the negotiations continued. Not the simple demands and refusals that had characterized earlier communications, but genuine discussions about the future of galactic civilization. Representatives from dozens of worlds arrived to participate in what was being called the New Harmony Conference. The final agreement was unprecedented in galactic history. The Veilthrak Empire would gradually transition from a military conquest state to a cooperative federation. Worlds that had been subjugated would be offered genuine autonomy in exchange for participation in joint exploration and research projects. Earth would serve as a model and training center for the new approach to interstellar relations. The transformed fleet would become the nucleus of a new kind of military, one devoted to protecting developing civilizations rather than conquering them. And Sarah, the girl who had started it all by reaching out to a dying dragon, would serve as the first guardian of the Galactic Federation, a mediator and protector for any world that chose cooperation over conquest. Standing once again on the observation deck of the transformed command ship, now officially renamed New Harmony, Sarah watched as vessels from a dozen different species worked together to establish the first truly integrated space station in the galaxy's history. "Are you satisfied with what we have accomplished?" Pyraxis asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Transforming individual hearts and minds was one thing. Reshaping entire civilizations would take generations. "Ask me again in 100 years, she said finally, "when we've had time to see if this new way of doing things really works in practice." The dragons tried to reshape the galaxy once before, Pyraxis reminded her. "We failed because we tried to impose our vision from above. You have succeeded because you offered choice from within." Sarah smiled, feeling the presence of her brother, Marcus, approaching. He'd volunteered to serve as Earth's ambassador to the new Federation, despite being only 15 years old. But then, again, age seemed to matter less when you were helping to build an entirely new form of civilization. "The real credit goes to humanity," she said to the dragon consciousness that shared her mind. "We're good at adapting to impossible situations. It's what we do best." Through her enhanced senses, she could feel the pulse of life spreading outward from Earth, carried by the transformed ships, the diplomatic missions, the simple example of beings from different species working together toward common goals. The universe was vast and full of challenges that would make the Veilthrak Empire seem simple by comparison. There would be other conquerors, other threats to the fragile network of cooperation they were building. But for the first time since the ancient dragons had fallen, Earth had guardians again. And this time, they weren't alone. "The future begins now," Pyraxis whispered. "Yes," Sarah agreed, watching the stars wheel overhead as the ship adjusted its orbit around Earth. And would have built something amazing. In the distance, she could see the lights of New Singapore, humanity's first off-world colony being constructed in partnership with former Veilthrak engineers and Centauri scientists. Children who had been born during the occupation would grow up believing that cooperation between species was normal the natural way the universe was supposed to work. They would inherit the galaxy Sarah was helping to build, a place where the strong protected the weak, where diversity was celebrated rather than conquered, where the answer to any challenge was to work together until you found a solution. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when the first alien ships appeared in Earth's skies. But then, again, the best stories never ended the way you thought they would. They ended the way they needed to.